Our text this morning is taken from Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. I'd like to begin by reading that, and it'll be the subject for my comments this morning. Luke chapter 7 and verse 1, "Now when he concluded all his sayings, hang on one second there. Now when he concluded all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. And a certain centurion's servant, who was dear to him, was sick and ready to die. So when he heard about Jesus, he sent elders of the Jews to him, pleading with him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they begged him earnestly, saying that the one for whom he should do this was deserving. For he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue. Then Jesus went with them. And when he was already not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying to him, Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof. Therefore I did not even think myself worthy to come to you, but say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes. And to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him, and turned around and said to the crowd that followed him, I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. And those who were sent, returning to the house, found the servant well, who had been sick. There's something about this story that I really like. It's one of my favorite narratives in the gospel. Something about this centurion, this tough guy that knows authority. He's a man's man, and he submits himself with great humility. There's something about strength and humility that are so attractive. And you got the kind of the meekish people that are kind of, just kind of wimpy, and I mean, that's okay. Some people are like that. And then you got the strong people that are domineering, and they kind of run the world, and it kind of can be offensive and abrasive. But this guy who is both strong and meek, that's like a package together that you could get excited about. We could use a lot of men like that. Men's men who are tough and strong and willing to fight for their family, for their women, for their country. We need those kind of people. But also a man who has this sensitivity, who loves his servant, and who knows what it is to respect somebody of a religious figure like Jesus. It's a really remarkable thing put together. And so I've been excited about sharing my thoughts about this text with you this morning. Jesus meets this man who knows his place. He knows where he stands. And what a great thing is when people, they know their place. They don't back off in wimpiness and disappear. They're not afraid, but neither are they self-assertive and always demanding their rights. A great model for us, and kind of interesting, it comes on the heels of that text I read earlier about blessed are the poor, and woe to the rich and the powerful. So this man shows an example. Can you be honoring to God and be strong? Can you be honoring to God and be wealthy? Can you be honoring to God and be powerful like this man? Well, yes, you can. That there is a sense in which you can be poor even when you're rich. And you can be tender and meek even when you're strong. And this centurion shows us some of these things. A little odd because the miracle here actually comes almost as a side issue. Very little attention is paid to the miracle. Most of the attention is paid to this man's attitude about Jesus. The one who's going to do this miracle, the focus of this text is upon how this man thinks about Jesus. And we can learn a lot as we study this text. So 5 parts of this I'd like to focus your attention on. 1, this man who knew his place, his accomplished character. 2nd, his presumptive representatives. 3rd, his true sense of his place. 4th, his insight about Jesus' place. And then finally, And this is remarkable. The Son of God is amazed at this man. How could you ever amaze Jesus? He was amazing everyone. But a rare case in the Gospels, Jesus is the one who is amazed. He's amazed at this man's response to him and his attitude towards him. So let's take these apart one by one. First, his accomplished character. So he's a centurion. He's a centurion. The centurions were the heart and the soul of the Roman army. In that sense, they were heart and soul of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire lived and died by the quality of their centurions. A centurion was a leader of approximately 100 men. That's the word centurion. Cent means 100. And so typically it was around 100 men that they supervised. And that was really the level of success. They needed good centurions to win battles. And so all the attention was faced upon getting the very best men to be centurions. A centurion had to be a soldier for a number of years. They had to be at least 30 years old. They had to be literate. That is, they had to be able to read quickly and write quickly because orders and instructions were critical, so they had to be literate. They had to have letters of recommendations talking about their moral character and their civic commitment. They had to be the best of the soldiers. They had to be near the strongest. They had to be near the biggest. They tended to be large because soldiers empower in those things. They had to be exemplary soldiers, not having to be disciplined, at least not excessively. And then they had to be leaders. One, they literally led. They were the first one charging in battle. They weren't the ones like the generals kind of standing back hoping their plans would work, but the centurions were out front leading the way. And so they had to be expert with their tools of war, with their swords and spears and shields. They had to be expert in all those things. So we know about this guy, he's a centurion, that he is these things. That centurions were extremely competent. They were the most competent of men. They were men who were physically strong, morally strong. They were courageous. They didn't run from battle. They faced it head on. That's how he got in this position, is that he was one of the best of men in many different respects. And so immediately when we hear about him, it's a little interesting that we get, I think, 3 or 4 different centurions who appear in the Gospels, and all of them are positive. That the Bible seems to like these centurions, which is a little surprising because they represent an occupying force. You know, they represent the power of Rome, so you would actually think the Bible would have at least some skepticism about them, but this is kind of the common way we hear about centurions. They're presented as very respectful, very intelligent, and even, surprisingly enough, spiritually interested people, as Cornelius in Acts chapter 10 is probably the greatest example of that. So he's a soldier. He's a soldier. He knows about authority. He knows about the rugged chain of command. He understands that's the way the military works. And that, of course, plays an important part in his story here, is he understands about giving orders and receiving orders. But perhaps, surprisingly of all, is that he seems to be kind. Now, there's a little bit of ambiguity when we first hear about this in verse number 2. And a certain centurion's servant who was dear to him was sick and ready to die. So all centurions had slaves that did work for them. That was very common. And not to demean anybody, they were a dime a dozen. If you could get a slave, a centurion could get a slave easily. So the fact that this centurion is deeply concerned about his servant, his slave, is a little bit of a mystery to us. We would not have guessed it. He really likes this. Now, it could be, we could take this word one of 2 ways. It could mean he is of usefulness. He has trouble finding somebody so competent. Or it could mean that he had a great love for him, that he had a emotional commitment to him. I tend to think it's the second, that he's dear, like the New King James translate this, he's dear to him. Centurions were not typically known for their kindness. It wasn't one of the essential virtues of a centurion. In fact, it tended to be a little bit dangerous because centurions were actually best symbolized. In fact, their ancient symbol was the rod, is that they were responsible to keep discipline, and they did so with rigor. To be a Roman soldier was not an easy thing. And if you transgressed the rules, the centurion was responsible to discipline you with corporal punishment. And they beat their soldiers. In fact, the centurion had the authority to beat anybody he wanted to. Anybody that he felt was out of line, he had that authority, even a Roman citizen who no one else was allowed to beat without permission. So centurions had a great deal of power. And some of them were quite brutal. In fact, one of the ancient military historians talks about one of the centurions whose name was called Sedo Alterum. That was his nickname. It meant, fetch me another. In other words, I broke my rod beating this guy, get me another one because I'm not done yet. Can you imagine? And that was not untypical. So we're a little surprised to hear that we see tenderness in this centurion. He comes to us at a human level. He comes to us with somebody grieving that his servant might die. And so we know he's a respected man militarily, but now we hear that he has some human virtues in terms of domestic virtue of caring about this man's life. Of course, in the Roman Empire, life was pretty cheap, and they went through a lot of lives, so we're a little bit surprised and even pleasantly surprised that this man of man, this tough guy, loves his servant. Praise be. So, he wants this servant not to die, and he knows, he's obviously heard of Jesus. And he knows a lot of things about Jesus, and number one, that he's a Jewish rabbi. He's a Gentile centurion of an occupying Roman army. He does not feel like he can just go to Jesus. In fact, he feels he should not just go to Jesus. And so he knows Jewish contacts there, probably Jewish civic leaders of Capernaum. And he apparently asked them to go and represent him. And so they do. And notice what these Jewish representatives who know him and they are requested to go. Verse 3, so when he heard about Jesus, he sent elders of the Jews to him, pleading with him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they begged him earnestly, saying that the one for whom he should do this was deserving, for he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue. So his representatives, he asked them to go and to ask Jesus to come heal his servant, and they do. And when they go, they say, this centurion is worthy. He's deserving. You should do this because he's deserving. Now, from their perspective, this makes total sense. There's a number of reasons why they would presume he's worthy, and that would be something you'd want to tell Jesus. Jesus has been very busy. He's occupied. He has hundreds of people coming to him. He's been all over the place. They need to get his attention and say, you really need to come, and the reason you should come is that he's worthy. In fact, the Greek emphasizes that they actually plead with him with earnestness. Notice in verse 4, they begged him earnestly. The word earnestly means they make a strenuous effort. They put their mind and their heart into convincing Jesus that he should come because this man is worthy. Now, if we could just pick up on that presumptuousness of what they take and what they say, this would be something that we would expect them to think because we would think this. There's a lot of reasons that we might think this guy is deserving. One is because human pride is just that way. We naturally think we're deserving. We have trouble not thinking that people shouldn't do good for us. That's just the human thing. And he's got a lot more going towards his natural pride than just that. So another thing is that he's a centurion. He's been recognized as an extremely important man. Like I said, the heart and soul of the Roman Empire. And so a man who is very important, a man who has influence, a man who probably could go to the emperor and plead his case and be heard. A man who would have been respected as a centurion. He is a leader of men. He has influence. He knows how to get things done. He's someone that is accomplished. He's not the down-and-out failure. He's not the drunkard. He's not the one that's profligate. He's not just sleeping around. He's got a reputation. He knows how to lead men. And so you would think that the centurion would be like, hey, of all people, Jesus should listen to me. That's what the Jewish leaders think, and that's what I reasonably would think. This guy isn't important. He's not just an average person whose life doesn't matter. He's a centurion. He's worthy. He's also a centurion of an occupying, conquering army. Here's one of the great challenges of human nature, is when people have absolute power over other people, it tends to make their pride go bigger. Is that when people have great power that they can do to people pretty much whatever they want, it tends to produce pride. It's like when you leave big brother home with little sister, he thinks he's really the cool thing. He thinks he's the greatest thing. When the boss is away, then the next highest employee all of a sudden thinks, I can do whatever I want. I can get my way. It's a natural thing, and he is in the most dangerous of these positions of having more pride because he has total authority. He can basically do to people like what he wants, and he can get away with it within a little reason. And you would think his pride of the sense of his worthiness would be very strong in that position. In fact, one of the best tests of human character is what people do when they have absolute power. The typical example is not very pretty. When people think they have absolute power, it goes to their head, and they think they can do whatever they want. So we can imagine the centurion saying, hey, I can do in Capernaum anything I want. I am a part of an occupying force. If I think something's bad, it's going to be treated bad. If I think something's good, and surely Jesus, this guy, should come and heal my servant because I'm really important. We would think that would be true. And not only that, he has a second most tempting thing for pride. He has a lot of money. Now that's not surprising because centurions were extremely well paid. It was an extremely valuable position. Rare to become one. It was very difficult to become one. And the Roman Empire knew they wanted to attract people to it, so they paid them handsomely. And not only that, they frequently offered incentives that if they won a battle, they would get to have a tremendous share of the spoils. And so it was not uncommon for centurions to become very wealthy. Lots of records of centurions retiring and living in huge estates in places. And so we know this man has money because the text tells us something about him. And that is he pays for a synagogue. Now actually this is kind of something that we can appreciate because that synagogue, it's not standing, but you can see where it was. You can see the ground floor. There was a synagogue that was built in Capernaum that you can now see the foundations of. And Lisa and I were there about 12 years or so ago, and so we saw the synagogue, at least the remains of the synagogue where this centurion bought, and it would have been extremely expensive. And he paid for it, so he's wealthy. And something about wealth tends to go to people's head. People sometimes draw the conclusion, not just sometimes, they normally draw the conclusion their wealth has made them better, that they are above other people, that they should be considered first, that they should be given priority. They should be giving accolades, and they should be given first position in things. They shouldn't have to wait. And so we can imagine this centurion being a man puffed up with wealth. In fact, the Bible itself indicates that wealth tends to do this to us. So we can understand his representative saying he's deserving. He's a centurion. He's an occupying force. We should try to make him happy. He's wealthy. And not only that, he's good to the Jews. He spent his money building a synagogue in Capernaum for the Jews, and he loves the people. Again, verse 5, for he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue. So this is a pretty good guy. He's got to have some moral sensitivity. His servant is sick, and he cares about him. He's now generous to an oppressed people by saying, hey, since I'm here, I want to help you. I'll build your synagogue for you so you have a place to worship. A lot of reasons why you would think he was deserving. We would expect him to be even a little arrogant. Now, I must say that something about the military does have a humbling effect, but not always so. So we are a bit surprised at this man's coming humility. Somehow he gets wind. Somehow he picks up, maybe he's there. I kind of read this text in the sense that he wants to see Jesus, but he knows he shouldn't. And so somehow he gets a sense that something's gone wrong in this request, that his representatives have embarrassed him. His representatives have been pleading with Jesus, saying, he's worthy, he's all these good things. And the centurion hears this, and he's like, oh no, this is terrible. And he takes his close friends, and he gets his close friends together and says, listen, they have given a bad report about me by saying I'm worthy. It's wrong. I want you to go and represent me more accurately. And so notice what happens in verse number 6. So then Jesus went with them, and when he was already not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, that is, close friends to him, people that are closer to his heart. The other one were Jewish leaders of the community. Now these are the people close who know apparently more of what he wants to actually say to Jesus. The centurion sent friends to him, saying to him, Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof. Therefore I did not even think myself worthy to come to you. So 2 times here he says, I am not worthy, I am not worthy. I'm not worthy for you to come and enter my house. I'm not worthy even to come and ask you this. That's why I sent these people, and I'm sorry, they misrepresented me. I do not think of myself as worthy. I do not think of myself as compelling for you to come and do this thing. That's not the way I think. So what a sense he's repeating this idea, I am not worthy. This story is not accidentally in the Bible. This is the way people ought to speak to Jesus. This is the way people ought to think. I am not worthy. And to have this man that we would think would be arrogant, we would think this man would be full of his own sense of self-importance, and he comes insisting, I don't even have the right to go to Jesus directly. I have to send representatives because I'm not worthy for him to come under my roof. I'm not worthy even to come and talk to him. But he does understand authority. He's been trained in authority. He understands what it's like to have superiors. You don't get to be a centurion if you don't understand authority. And when you are a centurion, you know there's people above him. Above a century was a cohort, and a cohort was above him infinitely so, and above them, of course, was the general of the army, and above the general was the emperor. And this chain of command was very rigidly taught and practiced, and he understood this. And he knew that you have to be careful when you talk to your superior. You have to have a certain attitude. If you're going to talk to somebody above you, know who you're talking to and know who you are. And know what they expect. And so he comes and he's thinking about Jesus and he's thinking about himself and he says, I understand the chain of command here, and I'm low on the totem pole here. And so he brings his practical sense of authority and he knows his place. And what he really knows he needs is grace. He knows he needs Jesus to act favorably towards him. That's what a Christian is. A Christian is someone who knows their unworthiness. And they know they have no right, they have no legal standing, they have no moral standing, they have no authority standing. They come asking for grace. And this man knows his place, and he knows if Jesus is going to heal his servant, it's going to be because he wants to do it, because he's willing to do it. He's willing to show favor upon this one, not because he thinks he's worthy, but he knows he isn't. Which leads him to one of the more remarkable statements about Jesus, and that is this centurion knew something about Jesus who was above him. And so this leads me to reflect upon this centurion's insight about Jesus' place. We might remind ourselves before we enter this in the deadliness of pride. C.S. Lewis, in his book Mere Christianity, gets to the chapter on lust, and he says, most non-Christians think that the main Christian virtue is anti-lust. And C.S. Lewis writes in that chapter, it's not here. This is not the center of Christian religion. Christian religion is interested in modesty, is interested in sexual restraint, but that's not the center. That's not the main fault we have. A couple chapters later, C.S. Lewis gets to this chapter, and he says, we finally come to the center of Christian morality. The most central Christian idea is that we must resist pride. He says, it's the essential vice, the utmost evil. Unchastity, anger, greed, drunkenness, and all that are mere flea bites in comparison. It was through pride that the devil became the devil. Pride leads to every other vice. Pride is the complete anti-God state of mind. Pride is spiritual cancer. It eats up the very possibility of love or contentment or even common sense. Pride gets people to do really dumb things. It causes us to ruin our own lives. And this man somehow doesn't have it. We can't help but think the Spirit of God has done something in his heart. In another place in that same chapter, C.S. Lewis says, it's really the Christian is the only one who knows his pride. Everyone else, of course, hates the pride in others. Our pride causes us to hate the pride of others, but we can't see it. It's only the Spirit of God that allows us to see ourselves as prideful. And the Spirit of God has been doing something in this man because he comes with a great deal of humility. And it's not until you're humble that you can begin to appreciate who Jesus is. And his humility begins to cause him to think, who is this miracle-working Galilean rabbi? And he concludes he is really far above him. And he has great authority. He speaks about Jesus as if he's the emperor. He says, Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy that you should enter my roof. Therefore I did not even think myself worthy to come to you, but say the word, and my servant will be healed. Verse 8, for I also am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under me, and I say to one, go, and he goes, and another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. So he says, I understand, I have authority, and your authority is far above, and I'm not worthy even to have you come close, but from a distance, you can still do this. Christ is the ultimate authority. The one who died upon a Roman cross, the one who was mocked and shamed and ridiculed as if he pretended to be a king. They said, here's the kind of king we think you are, we're going to crucify you. But the Bible says, in that he really is the king. He really is the one of all authority and power. Remember, at the cross, there's a centurion there, we assume a different centurion, who says, truly this was the Son of God. This was the one. There's something about that experience, and of course proven on Sunday morning when he rose from the dead, and then rising to the right hand of the Father with all authority and power given to him. And this centurion seems to somehow, we don't know how much he knows, but he knows enough to say this, that he is the one who I'm not worthy, who can say whatever he wills, and he is the ultimate authority. This one who died upon a cross is indeed the emperor of all emperors. We might wonder how the emperor would have thought if he heard about this story, about one of his centurions saying that there was a Jewish rabbi that he was not worthy even to have him come to his house. Christ is the ultimate authority, and Christ is not limited by distance. As Christ is Lord, he's Lord over all creation. He can do anything he wants wherever he wants. Now, of course, the centurion, this would have made sense to him, is that an army has different levels of authority, and the smaller your influence, the smaller territory. You might just have a little bit of authority, and then a centurion have a bigger authority. A cohort leader would have a bigger authority, and the emperor can speak wherever he wants, and everyone has to hear him. And that's who he says Jesus is. He's not limited by distance. His authority is that which reaches to all the places. He says, Jesus, just speak the word. You don't even have to come to my house, and my servant can be healed. He's a centurion. We don't know if he's Italian. We don't know what his nationality is. We just know he's not Jewish. And he knows he's a Gentile. And he knows the Jews did not go into Gentiles' houses. He knows that the Jews could barely stand to have any kind of interaction with the Gentiles. But he knows that Jesus is not bound by race. He knows he's not a racist. He knows that Jesus is willing to minister to a Gentile. And he says, you have the authority. You can cross racial boundaries. I'm sure the centurion had heard many Jews talk about the pigs, the dogs, those that were defiled as Gentiles, who weren't clean to eat dinner with. And he knows that Jesus is not bound by a race. He knows that Jesus is not bound by a class, here though Jesus would have been probably considered poor, in a poor class, but the poor frequently hated the rich. And he knows that Jesus is not going to be full of hatred towards his class, but he's willing to minister to him. His authority that transcends class. Jesus is not bound by law. There would have been Jewish laws that would have kept this from being something a rabbi would want to do. And the centurion knows that Jesus is not limited by the Jewish laws that this man had broken, even the civil laws perhaps, the moral laws that he had broken as well. Jesus has authority over all those. And he's not limited by whatever sickness it is. He's not questioning whether Jesus can heal whatever this sickness is, leads to death. It doesn't matter. Jesus has all authority. He can heal this one if only Jesus says the word. We might say the only thing that limits Jesus' power is the pride of an individual who will not bow to receive it. So consider Jesus' amazement. In Luke chapter 7, verse number 9, when Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him. Jesus was amazed at someone and turned around and said to the crowd that followed him, I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. Jesus is amazed. What is he amazed at? Well, here's my understanding of what he's amazed at. He's amazed that this Gentile Roman centurion has faith in Israel's Messiah. He's not just impressed with his own emperor. He's impressed by Israel's Messiah. One that he had probably every reason to despise because he was a conquering army over them. He defeated them. The reason he's there is to watch over them and keep order, and yet he believes that Israel's Messiah has all power and authority. Here we are, 20 centuries later, impressed with Israel's Messiah. Faith in Israel's Messiah. And Jesus is a little struck because he says that I've not seen this in Israel. Israel doesn't like their Messiah. Only a few Jews were following him, but this Gentile says, I see the Messiah of the world, and I embrace him through faith. Same thing is true in our time, up to our own time. Only a handful of Jews have believed that the Messiah has come. But millions and millions, tens of millions of Gentiles all over the world say, we can't wait till Israel's Messiah returns. We believe in him. And Jesus says, that's great faith. That's the kind of faith I'm looking for. Someone who's not just impressed with worldly power, not someone who is impressed with just what looks on the surface, but they have some insight into who Jesus is. Jesus must be impressed by his humility. Not that many people go around saying, I'm not worthy. Although I think Steve was a year or so ago talking about that he met somebody who said, how's he doing? And Steve said, better than I deserve. That'll get someone's attention because it's not the way people always think. People tend to think, I'm so mistreated. Too many people pick on me. I don't get as much as I need. And here the centurion says, I don't even deserve for you to do good things for me. But would you do it? He confesses unworthiness. Do you know your sin? Do you know your unworthiness? Even if we'd never sinned, we'd still ought to bow the knee to Jesus, but we have sinned. And we come needing his mercy. The centurion sets an example for a faith that impresses Jesus. The people say, I know my sin, I know my unworthiness. And then he has great trust in Jesus' power. You just say the word from a distance and it'll happen. So Jesus is impressed that this man trusts his authority. And even a suggestion that he has allegiance to this authority. That he said, this is an authority that I can respect. This is authority that I hold as my own. Speak the word and I'll be blessed because I want to be part of your kingdom authority. Heal my servant because I believe that you are a supreme authority. And yet it's a faith that's humble but still bold. That great mixture of Christian thinking. Deserved humility, but a gracious God who calls us and allows us to come boldly before him. Would you not do me favor? Would you not do this thing for me? With confidence that Jesus will, because he is a gracious king. And we can't help but think the reason this story is right here in Luke 7, which follows Luke 6, is Luke had just recorded about the blessed poor. About these people that have been oppressed and afflicted, and God is coming on their side, and he's going to uphold them. And Luke had recorded Jesus saying, "Woe to the rich, and woe to those who laugh now, and woe when men speak well of you." And we think, all right, this Gentile has no hope of being saved. He's rich, he's powerful, people speak well of him. And this man surprises us by saying, no, I am poor too. And I am weak too. And I am needy too. And I want to be among the blessed poor. What a great combination. That's why I love this man so much when I just hear his testimony. Strong and powerful and rich, and he gets things done, and he bows the knee before the Savior, and he says, I'm not worthy, just say the word. I hope that you have this blessed poorness in you, and that you look to Christ, not claiming your worthiness, not running away in some kind of false humility, but a humbleness that kneels before Christ and says, you are my Lord, you are my sovereign. And what you are, I embrace for my good. If you've never embraced the crucified and risen Messiah as your own, why not now? Confess your unworthiness and his sufficiency, in his mercy, and claim it as your own. As we close.